Well, hello and welcome. My name is Vince Velasco. I'm a 1978 graduate of the McKelvey School of Engineering, and I serve as the Executive Vice Chair on the Alumni Board of Governors, which is the advisory group to the WashU Alumni Association. I want to start by saying, like all of you, I was saddened to hear of the passing of former Chancellor Bill Danforth. Bill served Washington University for more than 65 years, including 24 as our 13th chancellor from 1971 through 1995. Though Bill has now passed from this earth, his name and his legacy that he built will continue to endure because of all he gave away in order to advance our Washington University mission and the greater St. Louis region. Well, now it's our pleasure to kick off this new program, WashU in the West, with this first event. WashU in the West events will highlight alumni and parents in the West while centering topics specific to their interest and industries. I hope many of you are able to watch the video message from Chancellor Martin in your confirmation email. This program is part of our expansive virtual connections events being offered weekly to the entire WashU community. I'm excited to welcome alumni, parents, and friends to today's program. Our audience is diverse with participants viewing from 14 states. A special welcome to members of the class of 2020, as this might be your first alumni event. For those of you who are parents, we hope your students are having a good start to this very unusual semester. For all those alumni and friends of the West Coast affected by the wildfires, know that we are thinking of you from campus. Welcome to all of you. Now, I know that many of you have participated in other webinars sponsored by the Alumni Association, but for those of you who are new to these events, I'd like to quickly review our format. You will all be muted during the event. We will first hear from our presenter, and then Mary Ray Perry, Associate Director of Alumni Networks, will moderate additional questions. We encourage you to participate by asking questions or sharing resources at any time in the chat box. During the Q&A session, we'll get to as many questions as we can. But now it's my pleasure to introduce alumna Cynthia Hodge. Cynthia Hodge earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from WashU and a master's degree in psychology from the University of Colorado, Denver. Cynthia has more than 30 years of professional work, including direct clinical service, community response to trauma, suicide prevention, intervention training, and leadership mentorship in county, state, national, and international roles and organization. Cynthia led a crisis team responding to the Columbine High School murder-suicide in 1999. In this response, she learned firsthand some of the challenges in leadership during times of uncertainty without a roadmap. She also came to appreciate the value and importance of teams in the variety of ways they can show up. All of these lessons can support our responses during the current pandemic. Since that time, Cynthia has provided leadership in training and developed teams in 23 countries around the world. Please join me in welcoming Cynthia Hodge.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me well? Yes. So grateful to be here and have a chance to talk with you all during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think I'd like to take the opportunity to sort of dedicate these two presentations and sort of discussions today to Chancellor Danforth and his legacy, given that my own beginning in psychology and crisis and trauma has started at the university and in some of my roles there in residential life. So anyway, I'm touched by by the fact that the timing is such that this is when we found out about his passing. I'm glad to have the chance to talk with you all today because I do believe that we're all needing some extra support and ideas about how to navigate during this pandemic, in addition to the other things that are going on. I know many of you submitted some questions and some things that have been challenges and also things that you've been doing to sort of support yourself and those around you as you're navigating up to this point. And I appreciate that. And hopefully I will address some of those things during this time, and then we'll have enough time for questions if there are still things kind of lingering for people. The first thing I really want to just talk about is the complexity of this. And likely you're really aware in many respects about how complicated this particular pandemic is. It's very, although it's all over the world, it's also very individual because everyone is having their own set of circumstances that they need to deal with and sort through. And we really don't have any kind of a map for this, and any ideas we had about how things were going to sort out. I'm not sure the compass is working all that well, frankly, because there continue to be other things happening. I also want to acknowledge that since there's quite a few people, I think we were close to 40, the last number I saw, 40 people on this particular call. There's no way really for me to know your own individual circumstances around the pandemic and how it's impacted you, but I'm imagining by the sheer numbers that it's likely some of you have either been sick yourself or have loved ones you're worried about, or may have even lost people that you love to the virus in the last 6 or 7 months. And for that, my heart just goes out to you. I sort of started with this slide because the picture in particular makes me think of any number of moments I'm having in any number of days. And I've had the opportunity since about mid-March to meet with a small group of colleagues and friends around the world. And these kinds of questions, why is everyone so cranky? Why am I tired? How am I supposed to plan? What in the world's going on? Where's the information? What are we supposed to do? These questions they're everywhere. I mean, so whether you're on the West Coast, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in Australia, these are the same kinds of questions that everyone is asking. And in some ways, this can be really helpful because it's a good reminder that we are not alone. Like whatever challenges you're having, it's likely there are other people having similar challenges, even if their circumstances are different. And I think not feeling alone can, at the very least, can help us feel like we're not sort of having this unusual, abnormal kind of experience. So I wanted to kind of break it down a little bit because we know in the time frame we have to try to offer some things that are helpful. And first to acknowledge that we could spend hours and days talking about any of these concepts, really. So to try to make it as kind of simple and compact that we can make it productive, I wanted to start with just breaking down and talking about these ideas about a crisis and a traumatic event. If you look at the definition for crisis, it talks about a turning point, instability or danger, dramatic upheavals with job loss, illness, change, disasters, things like that. Traumatic event also has similar kinds of things in its definition. It often has to do with your threats to yourself or other ones that you care about, feelings of fear, helplessness, or horror. Now, granted, all these things are happening. So for the purposes of our time today, I am going to say that I'm not going to dig into a bunch of research about all these things. If you are experiencing the current time as a crisis, surrounded by things that are traumatic, or you're experiencing as a traumatic event and there's a bunch of crisis things going on around it, both are fine. Both are valid, both are true, and everybody's individual experience will shift your focus depending on the day. And I know, whether that's loss of a job or loss of a loved one, or, fear of sending your kids to school, or losing a job, promotion, or any of these things, regardless of which definition we want to go with. I think that the reality is both are valid, and that's not a place for us to spend a ton of time and energy, because it's both a crisis and it's traumatic across the board in some fashion. So I think, given that, this quote I've found was really great. Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen is a doctor who does a lot of work in alternative medicine, and she works in the community medicine department at the University of California, San Francisco. And this quotation of hers: "The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet." I think this is the state of our world. There is no one getting out of this without being impacted. I might have yet to find anything anywhere where there's someone who's going to be able to get out of this without being impacted in some fashion. Now, it may be very different, but it is true that we are doing this all the time, and we're inundated with information about that. So since we can't avoid it, it might be good to help understand it a little bit. And so I wanted to talk about some of these responses that we have, that people have in general. And I loved some of these pictures, the two with the boulders in particular. I thought, well, that feels like me. Sometimes I feel like I'm holding it up, and sometimes I feel like I'm trying to push it back. And it just depends on what moment. The guy pulling his hair out, also helpful. Because I think these things are all true. The emotional and psychological responses that we have to traumas and crisis events, include all of these things: denial, anger, fear, depression, guilt, hopelessness, irritability, difficulty concentrating. I won't read them all. And the physical responses: headaches, digestive symptoms, fatigue, racing heart, sweating, feeling jumpy, and sleep disturbance. These are all regular responses to those kinds of events. Now, a couple of really important parts. One is these lists are not exhaustive. So there may be something that you're having that's different than before, that's not made it onto this list. And that's okay. These are just sort of a guideline. But it also means that you could use these ideas in ways to talk about other people in your life, whether it's people in your home or your family, extended family, your neighborhood. Good for people to recognize that the things that they're having are regular responses to these kind of events. The other thing that's not on here, that I might add in the future, has to do with what happens physiologically to us in a crisis or a traumatic event. And that is, our bodies are flooded with cortisol. It's just a stress hormone, which is really great for flight or fight kinds of things. If you're trying not to get eaten by the lion, that's what that adrenaline rush is for. So in the short term, it can be really helpful. In the long term, like over this really long period of time that we're dealing with now, it's not really so helpful, because what it does is it creates a lot of imbalance in your body, and can contribute to depression, anxiety, sleep issues, can change your blood sugar, it can raise blood pressure. And so we'll come back to that about how to deal with that, because we're all having that. And that is the physiological part is something that is fairly is important to recognize, and there are things to be done with that. So that's a quick overview of the kinds of things we are going to have as a response to this. In the Columbine response, my team and we often used these lists to check in with each other. So this week, how are you doing with how angry you feel, or how much guilt you feel, or you're feeling hopeless this week, or who's not sleeping well. And so it can be used as an entry into conversation with people that are part of your COVID bubble, or whatever it is you're calling your group of people that you spend time with. So these things are happening. I also want to acknowledge that the physical responses, to complicate things further, is that some of those physical responses are also considered possible symptoms of the COVID virus itself. Headaches, sleep disturbance, digestion issues, fatigue. So that adds another layer of complexity into just our regular response. Now, in addition to these things, um, that I love this picture in particular because I do think it's important to consider the layers of things that are going on. Um, the uh, the layers of an onion, first of all, there's lots of them, and it can make you cry, which I felt like when I was making these slides, I thought, yeah, okay, layers of things going on and it can make you cry. That seems like, reasonable enough. But I think the thing that we can easily lose track of with these bigger sort of traumatic things that are going on during the pandemic is all of these big and small, what I would call more regular losses that kind of can get pushed away or pushed to the side because we're so attuned to the big ones. Um, so, things like there's nothing that you can do right now that's the same as what you did before, really. So every time you've had to cancel a vacation or not make changes that you need, deal with, kids in school, going to school, not going to school, being homeschooled. What about if you've just graduated, trying to start a career, that's on hold? These are kind of these little losses that are taking place every day, really. And if you notice down on the bottom left, I think, is I put unable to pursue, ... which is unable to pursue anything you were planning to pursue. So that could be a relationship, a marriage, a divorce, having children, changing careers, moving across the country, retiring, getting a medical procedure that's now considered elective. I mean, all of those things are losses, and losses by definition have grief associated with them. And grief is a very exhausting process to go through to try to integrate that. So to not to not dismiss those things, I think, and to acknowledge, when you feel like there's a lot going on, but you're in a better position than other people in the current space, to not dismiss all these other things that have happened in your own life, even if it hasn't been huge and tragic and completely disruptive, that there are still things going on. And I think that's important for not just for you, but the people in your world. So the question really begs, okay, so if all this stuff is going on all the time, well, what are we going to do? Because we need to do something. We can't just do nothing, because that doesn't feel very good. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was this idea about, so let's first recognize really clearly some challenges that are going on, because and I know in the conversations I'm having with that other group, they're so delighted when someone says, oh, I was wondering about that, and somebody else says, oh my gosh, I was wondering about that too. This sense of is what's happening for us regular or normal? And normal is a whole big range of things. So to recognize some challenges, one is this idea of crisis or decision fatigue. You also hear it sometimes I see it on the papers, like pandemic fatigue. And there's the physiological part of that, which is we're kind of shot up with adrenaline, for a really long time now, which causes its own challenges. But there's also this part around that has to do with the amount of what I would call bandwidth in my head, the amount of energy that's required now for the most basic of decisions. Back in, January, I might have hopped in the car and run to the store to get milk. I wouldn't do that now. Going to the grocery store, where I live in Colorado, so we've had mask mandates, and we shut down for almost 90 days, all that. So those most basic decisions that I would do before take a lot of planning now. When am I going to go? What's a good time to go? What's not the time when people who are over 65 can go? Do I get groceries for my neighbor who can't go to the store? Can I spend the least amount of time in the store possible? Do I have other things I need to work around? Do I have a mask? How do I deliver groceries to other people if we're trying to be socially distant? I mean, that decision that used to not take any decision making at all now takes up a lot of headspace. So when I'm using all my bandwidth for those kinds of decisions, do I let my daughter play with this friend or hang out with this friend? Has that friend been safe? Do they have to wear masks? So they only hang out outside? Those kinds of things that would never take up hardly any, 60 seconds at the most to figure out before, now take discussion and thought process and planning and all of that. Well, we only have a certain amount of bandwidth. So when you're using it all up for those basic things, then when other things come up, it's hard to rally up because there's not as much reserve left as we used to have. And I think it's important to recognize that, because it gives us at least a little more kindness for ourselves when we feel easily frustrated by something that a year ago wouldn't have even registered at all. So that is a challenge. Looking to leadership. It's human nature that when you're in a crisis, or experiencing something traumatic, even little kids, they will go to someplace, somebody that comforts them, that feels safe to them, that can help them understand the situation that's going on. So we all look to leaders, either formal leaders, elected or appointed or whatever, or people that we look to for leadership in our lives that, maybe a parent or a relative or a mentor or something like that, in times of uncertainty. Well, that is not working really very well right now. At least not very much. I mean, and I will steer clear of anything like too long and drawn out about this, but if for no other reason, if I take out all the other things going on in this country in particular about leadership and guidance and all of that, just the sheer fact that no one alive has lived through something like this before means that leaders only can provide so much information. Even good leaders only have X amount of information available to provide. So that is something that we have to figure out a different plan around. Another challenge is that change is the only constant. I mean, it feels a little bit better now than it did early on, but the information is changing all the time, from day to day, from the morning to the afternoon sometimes, from this newspaper to this internet site to this, it's all happening all the time. That does not instill great confidence or comfort in people experiencing traumatic events. So that is a challenge with this in general. Another challenge has to do with this idea that everyone's in the same boat. And I said, or at least the same body of water, because, people's boats may be looking different in this particular ocean right now. But that is a challenge because there's no real way to escape, may be not the right word, but there's no reprieve. I know in the Columbine High School shooting, we could at least leave Colorado and go somewhere else where it wasn't everything everywhere all the time. We had a place to go where there was a bit of a reprieve. There is truly nowhere to go right now where there's not some version of what's going on in the media, on TV, in newspapers, in discussions. And so that lack of reprieve for us, you can't just go on vacation. It's like, well, where would we go on vacation? And when we go on vacation, would we really be having less of this going on vacation, or will we just be going to a different place that's got it's the same or different challenges with this particular pandemic? So that's not really all that helpful. So this other idea has to do with, and I think it's been brought to light even more over the last couple of weeks with the fires, the fires on the West Coast. We've got so much political tension in this country, civil unrest, natural disasters. Those are all big things, but other life stuff just is going to keep happening. It's not as though, it's like any other crisis, it's not as though you can make everything else stop and just deal with this part. People's I said, I think in the one earlier today, that for me, the thought of my car breaking down could, like, on some days just nearly put me, in complete confusion and meltdown. Whereas normally that would have not really that much impact at all. I live in a small place, getting my car fixed is not that big of a deal. But right now, something like that, that's a regular life thing that happens, I just don't have much left for those kinds of things. So I'm less patient, I'm more irritable, I have a much shorter fuse about things that are regular life things that will continue to happen. So I love this quote from Viktor Frankl about when we're no longer able to change the situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. And I do think that starting with ourselves and the things we can have some influence on is a place where we could find some relief. Might be too big of a stretch, but we might find some moments of comfort, or at least a little bit more ease, if we kind of focus on some of those things. So let's, so we talked about the challenges. So, the reality is all that first part is all about, this is a big mess that we're in, and we don't really know when it's going to be over. And everybody's being impacted differently, and everybody's being impacted. And so what are we going to do in the meantime? Because we don't know currently, we don't know what in the meantime, how much time that actually is. Is that till there's a vaccine? Is that till people have the vaccine? Is that till the end of next year? So let's sort of keep a perspective about this and look at some things that have some progress that's been made. I do believe that in some ways we are not in the same kind of crisis. I mean, I'm not saying that no one is in a crisis, but in general, as a whole, we are not in the same kind of crisis that we were in March, April, May of this year. There is some progress that's being made, and some integration of these new things that we need to consider taken into account. Now, you may not like them. I may not like them, may not be happy that we have to integrate them. But it is true that, in March, we didn't have, tens of millions of people in the United States with masks in their houses. People have masks now. For the most part, people have some kind of masks. Most people. Mostly people have figured out how to navigate without, going to happy hour, inside with, 50 other strangers to, celebrate the end of the week. We've figured out ways to do other things instead of that. So we have integrated some parts of this pandemic culture that we're living in. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, because it helps us move beyond that initial crisis part, which will help with the cortisol thing. And it just help, anytime you can move away from something that's a crisis or traumatic, even if it's just this much movement, it can feel so much better. So hold on to that. The other thing is, I have heard from many people, certainly been true in my own life, is that, when things are sort of life or death and there's all these fears about health and wellness, your priorities really do sort of rise to the top. Happy hour, not so much a priority really anymore. And maybe that friend or even relative or neighbor that, is okay and you spend some time with sometimes, but not really all that fulfilling or rich of a relationship, not likely you're spending a whole bunch of time on that right now, because it takes all the energy you have to invest in the things that are priorities for you, whether that's in your own household, in your family, in, friends, in work-related activities that, are meaningful to you. Again, bandwidth, I sort of think of in my own head, bandwidth is like this much bandwidth. If I have to use all my energy doing basic things like getting food and making sure my family is safe, that takes up almost all my bandwidth right now. So the things that are really important to me, the people who are really important to me, that has shown up. And I'm not spending a bunch of, free energy on other things because there's not any. And I think that there's some value in that moving forward, because it does provide clarity. Another thing I think that is important is this idea that time is passing. And although that might seem logical, like certainly it's not the same as it was in April, But I do believe that for all the time that is passing, we are getting more and more information that's helpful, whether that's more information about a vaccine, whether it's more information about testing or not, or wearing masks, or social distancing, or how you can work remotely when you didn't work remotely before. Time passing is sorting out things. And so we are not in the same place in September that we were in April. And that also means that leaders, assuming we have good ones, leaders are also getting a little more clear about what they actually know about this versus what they think they maybe could possibly sometimes understand, which was not very helpful in the early stages from anybody. So those are things that are progress, and I think it's important to recognize that those things are true. Now, so there's a few things that on a sort of daily basis that we can kind of work towards ourselves with all that stuff happening externally. One of the things I want to go back to is this idea about leadership. And I'm a big proponent of good leadership. It's one of my biases. If you're going to be a leader, please be a good one, because being a bad one creates all kinds of other problems. But in this particular case, what I would say is you do have the ability to lead in your own life. And in fact, you have been leading in your own life when you've been trying to figure out, what do you need? What does your family need? What do your friends need? Where are you going to get information? How are you going to let information inform your decisions? What are your priorities in this moment? And we can sometimes leading ourselves is the hardest thing to do, but right now, really, we're kind of without. So if you focus on your daily things as, okay, I am the leader in my role, whatever my role is in my world, then you can start to sort through some of these things like, okay, in this moment, what is the priority? So, and in this moment, that might not be the same as the moment 3 hours from now, because, things are pretty fluid right now. So in this moment, what is your priority and how are you going to make those decisions? Because it's all about balancing things out. This would be another time where I would just do a couple of more specific things. One is in leading your own self or in your family, friends, be sure that, physical activity is really important. Again, it helps with the cortisol, move your body around. And the other thing is limit your media exposure. Now that is a very specific thing. And what I would say is I learned this back during the time of the Columbine shootings, is that first of all, once there's a certain amount of information, there's not more information after that. We saw the same thing with 9/11. Once there was a certain amount of information, there was a lot of repeating of the same traumatic information, but there wasn't a ton of new stuff coming in all the time. And so the more you saturate yourself with media, whether it's newspapers or internet or TV or whatever it is, you're really just reinforcing traumatic information and it's not really moving you anywhere. It's just saturating you more, which will really just become more of a challenge. So I would really encourage that. A few other things, and this really has to do with the idea of resiliency. And I have a friend who does some training on radical resiliency and not the kind of resiliency where you just kind of bounce back, because people talk about, well, kids just bounce back. They're so resilient. It's like, her idea, my idea really of resilience is we're steering through stuff. We're not bouncing back. We're not bouncing back to anything from before, because you can't eliminate this as part of our experience now. So this idea of flexibility, I love this particular picture because this feels like almost every discussion I've had in my life in the last 6 months. Oh, let's do this. Oh, wait, we can't do that because of this. Well, let's do this other thing. Well, that could work. Oh, wait, no, now that doesn't work because of this. On and on and on, that has gone. Nothing like I'm a single parent of an almost 14-year-old. And first problem being, you mean to tell me that I'm going to spend 6 months in this house and you're the only person I can talk to? Really? For like that whole time? And I'm like, pretty much. So then it's like, so do you want to know why we can't go to London this summer? Because instead of going to London, we're going to go to the Rocky Mountain National Park. This is not a good trade. There's no way for me to smooth this around and coach this such that feels like a good trade. However, it is something we could do. And the other things that we tried to do didn't make any sense. So I think this idea of being flexible with your expectations will allow you to be more or less frustrated as things go on. Because people that really like things very tidy and very ordered, that creates an additional stressor right now because there is nothing that's tidy or ordered about this. So if you build in flexibility, then you can feel like you're having some influence. The other thing about flexibility, part of that definition up there, in addition to adapting, has to do with responding with sensitivity. And I do think we just don't know what's happening for other people. There was a really great example here in Colorado where somebody was really frustrated because they saw some person had gone to like Home Depot or somewhere for paint, like they were going to paint their house. And it was during the mask mandate and all this other stuff. And people were really upset about that. Like, that was not an essential thing to go do. And then the point was made, well, you don't know. For that person, if painting their house is the thing that they can do if they can't go out, and that helps them not relapse into some kind of addiction, that was worth the trade for them. For them, it was essential. So I think it's important for us to just remember we're all doing the best we can and nobody really knows what they're doing. So we're all sort of sorting it out as we go. This next one has to do with perspective and reframing. This picture I got from one of my friend's Facebook pages, and her father just died from COVID 2 weeks ago. So it seemed really fair that this would be her particular perspective on that post. But I think the best that we can do in finding some value in the circumstances as they are, connecting with other people that get us outside of our own world, whether that's on phone or Zoom or, my neighbors and I, we yell across the street at each other a lot. Get out of your head, move around. Truly, if you're an overthinking kind of person, which I can be, overthinking right now will only make you feel worse, is my experience, because overthinking it doesn't give you any more answers because there's no more answers to be had. So it's not like solving something. So get out of your head, move around, get engaged in something else. Look for the things that you can change and can have some influence over. And the last one I really put was just to give yourself and others some grace about things, because people are often can be very hard on themselves about what I could be doing or should be doing. I have all this time at home. I should do all these things I've been thinking I would do forever. It's like, well, yeah. And as my daughter would say to me, well, Mom, this is when I say to her, well, we could go do this. And she's like, yeah, I know. She said, but Mom, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so like there's not like a way that this is supposed to go. It's like, you're right, sweetheart. There's no reason that says this is how it's supposed to go because we're in a pandemic, because we don't know. So be kind to yourself and don't get too tripped up in all the things you should be doing, because we are doing the best we can. And likely everybody else around us is doing the same thing, even if we don't understand what that means. This last thing, hope, has to do, just check the time to be sure I'm not, hope is being able to see light despite the darkness. And in this case, hope really is to trust in the potential that things will get better or different. And I do think that hope is incredibly valuable if you can have it, if you can find it. That the idea that, it's not going to always be this way. Now, we might not know what it is going to be like, but it's not going to always be this way. In fact, it's not even today like it was 6 or 8 weeks ago or 4 months ago. It is changing. And so how to develop things that you feel hopeful about, even in this day, like today I feel hopeful. I believe anyway, I'm recovering from the virus. So today, perhaps my hope is I don't need a nap before 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And if I can get past 3 without needing a nap today in my recovery, that feels like great success. And I'll take that today. I think the idea to not get so far ahead of yourself that you get frustrated because things are changing all the time. So to find hope in smaller sections of things is really quite beneficial, because then you can feel some shift, not thinking, people are starting to feel really, I've heard more and more people say, people are starting to find it really hard to not look forward to things. You know, like, oh, I look forward to the concert seasons in the summer, you know, when there's all this outdoor music, or I look forward to seeing my grandkids, or I look forward, and it's like now that it's like they can't figure out what to look forward to because forward is too far out to really know how it's going to be. And so really just been talking with people about, okay, so one of the things about resilience is, you know, have hope, but frame things and have a perspective that is, okay, for today or this week, what am I going to be hopeful for? Because if you get too far out into the future in this amount of uncertainty, it can feel really hopeless, and that doesn't really serve. It doesn't serve you in the moment, and it certainly is not going to be helpful, because in the future, you know, a million things could change before we get to that future point, whatever that is. And it's a lot of worry and distress over things that we can't really change. So, you know, find things to do, break it down with, you know, your loved ones, whoever that happens to be, things that you can make a difference in, because I think it does change the perspective. I did put down on here the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. You do not have to be thinking about suicide to call this number. That network has resources all over the country, all over the world. I do encourage you, whatever space you're in right now about this, or your family is in, that this is the time to make sure you have crisis information. So know how to access through your health insurance, if you need sort of counseling or other kinds of crisis support, community mental health, EAP programs. Lots of places are doing telehealth, and there's local crisis lines sometime. And really the idea being that the time to have the crisis information and pull it together is before you need it, because by the time you need it, it's not very easy to figure stuff out. So I always encourage people to do that. So I'm grateful to have had a chance to come. I hope that some of this was helpful. I'm happy to answer questions. You have my contact information, so you can also email me. And I think just to remind people that we are all on this path, and we just don't know where it's headed, and nobody knows where it's headed. So we have to just do our best to look out for ourselves and look out for each other throughout this time of uncertainty, and take things in really small baby steps. So thank you very much. Hope you're safe, and I will stop sharing so we can have questions.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Cindy. I feel so privileged that I was on both the morning and this lunchtime event, because even though I felt like I got so much information from the first one, hearing it all again was fantastic. So I will suggest for the audience that you have the opportunity to listen to it twice as well when we send out the post survey email tomorrow, because it will have this recording on for all of you. Definitely just sunk in even better. So thank you again, Cindy. And I know I said it this morning again, but I loved all the conversations you've had with your daughter. It sounds like she gives you a lot of insight, so that's great. So let's start with questions, and for the audience, feel free to add any additional questions in the chat. So if you did submit any that we haven't covered already, feel free to resubmit them in the chat, and we'll try and get to them. Okay, first question. So since we don't know when normal will return, is it healthy to delay making major decisions until life returns to normal?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's one of those questions that we wish there was some place to go that had a good answer. So I'll give you my best general answer, which is it kind of depends. I think that we are all in a position where we're trying to balance out life and our needs and our wants and the risks involved and our own health and the health of other people. So I think it depends on how this decision that you will or won't make, how it fits into the larger picture, because we don't know when this will be over. So if it's something, you know, I think I used the example earlier, if it's something about, you know, getting out of a violent situation or a violent relationship of some kind, you know, you probably don't want to wait if you're not physically safe. Now, if it's something that can wait until January, we might know a whole lot more in January. Of course, we might also not know a whole lot more in January. So it depends on how pressing this decision is based on a, the next year, 2-year perspective on your life and the context of that. And that would be individual for people to sort out.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, so measuring how timely that decision needs to be made. Okay, next question. So for audience members that are leaders of teams, so specifically in the workplace, do you have any suggestions on how to keep up morale with everything going on?
Also a very good question. All these are very good questions. And I wish there was a more clear, like, here's a list kind of response. I think for leaders, I have a particular fondness and investment in leaders, having had my first role of leadership be taking over the crisis team on the day of the Columbine shooting. I think is sometimes for leaders being clear and vulnerable and transparent about where things are at maybe makes the most sense. I mean, there's no sense trying to convince people it's not as bad as it is, because it really is as bad as it is. So you don't want to lose credibility about that. And I think we have to balance out, because all the people we're leading, if it's a work-related thing, all these people are also having this virus impact them in their own personal lives. And you may or may not have a lot of information about how that is or what that looks like. So, I mean, I would encourage leaders to go to your teams and just say that, how are we going to get through this together? Because we're all in this together and it's a mess. So what are the things that would be helpful to you? How can we help each other? And they may have some ideas. And that might be the best, because that gives them some input and some influence over what's happening. And anytime we can give people some choices right now and some control over things right now, we'll feel good, even if it's in the context of this is kind of a nightmare. So that I always go with honest and transparent, and then work back from there, as opposed to just trying to figure out something to say to make people feel better, because I don't know that there's anything that specific that will work.
I love that. I love that answer. And similar to your answer this morning on that too. And I think, because I've seen that in my own workplace within alumni relations and university advancement for the university, they have done what you're suggesting, at least my direct leaders, and definitely acknowledging and giving flexibility and asking how we're all doing, which is very appreciated. So I love that answer. Thank you. And I know you already shared some tangible strategies with us, but as we move forward with our days and our weeks and our months leaving this program, what are 1 or 2 big strategies that you want us to leave with to kind of have our last thing?
I think I would just encourage people to identify places where you can make decisions in leading your own life in ways that serve you and your family or your loved ones somehow. Remember that you're not alone, that the whole world is experiencing something like this. And to, as time goes on, to continue to identify things where progress is being made, even if it's just progress in your own house, that still is progress. And that creates hope. And I think that that is an important thing for us to try to hold on to, especially given that we don't know how long this is going to move forward.
Unmute myself there, yes.
Okay, no problem.
Totally agree, thank you. Well, great. Well, then that is towards the end of our program. But before I close, Cindy, do you want to add anything else or suggest anything on your website that people should really check out?
Sure. People can check out the website. There's and the Facebook page. Often there's some inspirational things on there that can be shared or looked at. And as things move forward, my hope is to expand some of this into some trainings that people could take into workplaces or into other organizations and things like that. So let me know if that's of interest to you, or send me an email and I can keep you posted about that, because I do believe this seems to be information that it could be valuable to people right now, because this is going to go on for a while. And I think however we can support each other in navigating that, it will be important.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cindy. I know your vast experience and your time today with us on 2 different events is so appreciated. We had, over 200 people register for this, so it's definitely something that people needed and will appreciate. So thank you for that. And thank you to Vince as well for being a part of this program. Both of your time, like I said, is appreciated, especially in this WashU community. And what a fantastic event to start off WashU in the West for us. So for those of you who didn't hear at the beginning, WashU in the West is just paired with our virtual connections program. So all the virtual events and resources that the university is offering to the greater WashU community across the world. And so WashU in the West is just specifically highlighting alumni that are in Mountain and Pacific time. So welcome from wherever you are. And just want to let you all know that you will receive a post-event survey, and that will include the recording of today's programs and additional resources that we shared. And we look forward to seeing all of you again for a future program. If you do have any suggestions for us for speakers, please email alumniassociation@wusl.edu. It's alumniassociation@wusl.edu. We absolutely are, as much as we've had to pivot from doing in-person events, and that was the own stress for our team, it's been really fantastic being able to reach and highlight so many more alumni and parents. So if you have any suggestions, please pass them on. Additionally, we encourage you to visit the digital resources and virtual connection page on our website to learn about other ways you can connect with WashU alumni, students, and faculty. And this page is updated regularly. So thank you all. We really appreciate you being here and hope you have wonderful rest of the days. Thank you again, Cindy.
Oh, thank you all for having me. I appreciate it. Good luck, everybody. Stay safe. Take care.